Get that gun! Move along, huh? Come on, Ellen! Drive that nigga! Get that gun! Move along, huh?
Here then is the origin of Negro slavery. The reason was economic, not racial. It had to do not with the color of the laborer, but the cheapness of the labor. Slaves were punished by whipping, shackling, hanging, beating, burning, mutilation, branding, rape, and imprisonment. Life on the fields meant working sunup to sundown 6 days a week and having food sometimes not suitable for an animal to eat. Life on large plantations with a cruel overseer was oftentimes the worst. Slavery began in the United States in 1619, when British privateers had captured them off a Portuguese slave ship. Although some studies suggest African slavery lasted so long in southern United States because slaves were believed to be inferior to their masters, the majority of research suggests that slavery actually lasted so long because slave labor was cheap and brought in massive profit to plantation owners and any other slave owners who needed work done for almost no cost from 1619 to 1865. Slaves were first introduced into the South in 1619, when British privateers had captured them off of a Portuguese slave ship, where they proceeded to land in what is now known as Hampton, Virginia. In the 1600s, most of the colonies were agricultural based and driven by indentured servitude. By the 1680s, slavery had become morally, legally, and sociably acceptable, and as less and less indentured European laborers migrated to the colonies, enslaved Africans became a necessity and widely acceptable. Enslaved Africans were a cheaper, more plentiful labor source than indentured servants, and mostly were transported from Africa to work on tobacco, rice, and indigo plantations in the southern states. The economy of the South depended on the cultivation of crops. The need for agricultural labor led to the establishment of slavery and created a society sharply divided in class lines, with African slaves at the very bottom. Slavery fueled the economic engine of the South with the production of cash crops such as cotton, tobacco, and sugarcane. By the start of the Civil War, the South was producing 75% of the world's cotton and creating more millionaires per capita than anywhere else in the nation. Slavery lasted so long because the South had a desperate dependence on slave labor to fuel their profit from agriculture and the production of demanded crops such as cotton. Slavery was never widespread in the North, though many Northern businessmen grew rich on the slave trade and investments in Southern plantations. The Northern economy was based on industrial growth, manufacturing, mass transportation, and they used immigrants for cheap labor. After the American Revolution and in the early 1800s, following the invention of the cotton gin, is when slavery in the South was at its peak. The Southern economy relied on cash crops, the cotton plantations, slave labor, and the trade with the North and England. The Southern economy was based on land, which equaled wealth. All Northern states had abolished slavery between 1774 and 1804, but it continued to remain vital to the South. 1860 was perhaps the greatest peak of slavery, as enslaved people in the United States tripled, with nearly 4 million slaves in the states, and over half of them living in the South with the cotton production. Enslaved people made up 1/3 of the population in the South, and they mostly resided on farms and large plantations.
Following the invention of the cotton gin, cotton became the dominant cash crop in the agriculture economy, in which it very quickly comprised more than half the United States' total exports. The irony of the situation was that most people believed the cotton gin would decrease slavery, but because the profitability of the device increased the demand for both land and slave labor. By 1850, 1.8 million of the country's 3.2 million slaves were producing cotton, and by 1860, slave labor was producing over 2 billion pounds of cotton per year.
According to multiple research sites, such as History.com, Britannica.com, and USHistory.org, on a document written on the Southern argument during the Civil War, overall, slavery economics trumped morality in the Southern states. As inhumane as slavery was, the economy would not have thrived as it did without it. The reason the phenomena lasted so long was because the Southern economy was entrenched in a way of life that involved using African slaves as their primary source of wealth for many, many years.